Hello, and welcome to Watershed Moments podcast. This is our series on parenting, and today we are focusing on divorce. And I want to welcome back Katie Zuverink, and you have with you there Meagan Jackson. Meagan, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, yeah, I'm so excited to be here. I am a licensed professional counselor and registered play therapist in the Dallas area. I specialize in working with kiddos and families, specifically kids that have experienced trauma and attachment issues and things like that. And then my real specialty is supporting the whole family unit. So I love doing parenting and things like that.
Well, I'm glad that y'all are both here, and I'm actually really excited to get started. And so, what I'd like to do is just throw out some questions for y'all, and y'all can go round and round or however you want to do it, popcorn it, but let's go ahead and jump in. In dealing with divorce, what are some of the super common misconceptions that y'all hear?
Okay. So, I think probably the first thing that I want to say is that I could not be more excited that Meagan's here because she is, probably the person that I trust the most with families and kids. And so I am just super excited about, hearing what you have this morning. And so about misconceptions about divorce, I think the thing that feels biggest to me is when people just this, when we see divorce on TV and it's like a hot disaster mess. And it's, crazy conflict and everybody's yelling at each other and people are throwing clothes out the window and, and I think there's just this misconception that divorce has to be a war and it has to be really,
Loud.
Yeah, loud. Ooh, that's good.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And it has to be disastrous and it has to destroy all the relationships. And I think that is just false. Yeah. And so I think that it can't be amicable, it can't be kind. So I think that's probably the biggest thing that I see. What do you think?
Yeah, and I would totally go off of that because I think not only do we think of it as this a lot of times it's really loud, it has to be this loud, dangerous, destructive thing, but I also think of it's this misconception of that we get to be done with that person. So not only do I have to destroy them and get destroyed in myself, but then I never have to engage with that person again.
Totally.
And the reality is for a lot of our families, they have kiddos and that person is going to always be a part of their lives because of these wonderful people that they've created. So I do think that it's the one, like Katie's saying, that it has to be this horrible thing that is destructive, but then two, that we get to say, check out, that chapter's done, never have to look back.
Yeah.
And that's definitely just not the reality of it at all.
Totally.
Yeah. I don't like the word, but I like the way that you explained it, Meagan. Loud, because that is one of the things that I think of. You think of the movies and you think of loud and, like you said, clothes flying out the windows. I'm wondering too, when you are talking to parents, and so whether it's loud or it's amicable or they're doing a great job co-parenting, whenever they've gotten to you, what are some of the biggest concerns that y'all hear from parents as their kids are going through this?
I would say the biggest one question is my kid going to be okay? Are they going to be able to handle all of this if I destroy their lives because we've destroyed the family? I got this from Katie, if I'm gonna be super honest, but the language of no, we're going to reframe it. You're not destroying family. We're creating two separate families. And so I just think that is probably the biggest concern I hear from parents.
Yeah. Yeah. So this worry that, that we're going to traumatize them, right? That this divorce is going to traumatize them. And I think, it's really wonderful because in the last 30 years, there's all this research about divorce in and of itself is not a trauma. The rearranging of the family, the kind of the language that we use and that we talk to families about, there's this phrase, right? The coming from a broken family.
Yeah.
And I do that with air quotes, right? Like the broken family. And I think that's really just such that's an unfortunate phrase that I think is just not, it doesn't serve us well. And so what we help parents kind of do is be thoughtful about changing the way that we speak about what's happening. And so we do lots of shifting into our family is going to function from two houses. You'll have a house with mom, you'll have a house with dad. We will both be your parents. We're not going anywhere. We will love you forever. We'll always be here for you. And we will have two houses now. And so, speaking back to concerns, I think, people just worry about like, is divorce bad for them in general? Is it going to cause a ton of stress? And then, how am I going to know if they're struggling? And then what do I do if they are? And so I think those are the things that people come in with. Yeah.
Do you feel like the concerns are the same no matter what age the kids are? So like when parents are coming in with their concerns and their kids are in, elementary school, are they the same concerns? Or do you feel like, I don't even know why, but I go straight to like a middle school because that feels like a very scary time in people's lives. And so like, are the middle school parents more concerned, or is it more of a parenting style or a personality type that is more concerned? Or I don't know, is there any nuance there with concerns and maybe even the way that you handle those concerns? Or is it pretty much your answer and your strategy is the same each time?
That's a great question.
That is a great question.
I don't know.
I would say that like the concerns of how am I going to know if my kid is okay? What do I do if they're not okay? Those ones are pretty consistent, I see throughout the board. So depend regardless of the age range, right? So like specifically with our littler kids, like, are they going to tell me? Are they going to like, what are the changes? What are the things I should see? And then I feel like older parents with their kids that are like middle school or high school, they're like, are they going to start throwing things at me? Like, when is it? Or are they just going to be so angry, and all those things, and like helping the parents navigate of what is your normal and how do we support your family and support you to support your kiddo, I think is the biggest piece. The thing that kind of like, that is important to me and kind of the system I work out of is really helping to support parents and helping their kiddo. Obviously, there's going to be a space and a time for individual therapy and we can work through that. But I think helping, I would say general, my rule of thumb is like, I have a general thing that we kind of always look for and I want to help support and address, but every family is different and all those nuances, we want to make sure we're supporting and addressing.
And I think, I think it is, I love your point, Taffy, about, does it look different for different age groups? And I think that's exactly right? Like it's nuanced and it looks different for every family. And there are some ranges, right? Like it looks a little bit different per age group. And here are some, and that's part of what we do is in this age range, here's some of the things that you may see. And these are very normal responses. And then in this age range, here are some of the things you may see, and that's really normal. And let's look at the history of what your kiddo, how your kiddo responds to stress. And does this look like it's within the realm of normal for that child? And how can you show up and be supportive in the midst of all of that? What are some words that we can use to be helpful? And then I love to just give little short scripts, right? So when parents get, if a kid is like, why are you getting divorced in the middle of breakfast? Right. And the parent like freezes and has like deer in the headlights, like, like, I don't know about you, but I have those moments where I'm like, I don't, what? And like, we have a degree in this. And so I still have moments where I'm like, I will get back to you,
Yeah.
So if we can, so we try to prepare them with like little phrases that can be helpful, so that they just have something real quick to go to, so they don't have to think too hard.
I love that. And actually, when you said, you didn't use the word milestones, but when you said kind of those markers of this is typical in this stage and or this age range, or this is, I think that that's key too. I know that people kind of like tidy charts and
Yeah.
divorce doesn't fit in a tidy chart, but I think those things are probably helpful. And so that's cool to know that that's part of the process,
Oh,
and then
yeah.
obviously catered to the needs of the family. And, you know, when you mentioned the word reframe, I love the way that you said that, and how um, it just feels really healthy and really attainable and really fresh and hopeful. And so is that kind of your go-to day one when you meet with a family? Or I don't know, like, is there a typical day one sit down um, intake? Does it include those types of things? Just more of changing the words,
Yeah.
changing the
I
language?
mean, so I think we probably, and okay, I'll finish whole sentence here. Probably every clinician does things a little bit differently, but what do you think?
Yeah. So I work with the whole family. So not every family comes in for like, we're coming in because we got a divorce. So typically the kiddos are coming into me because they are struggling at school, or they're having meltdowns at home and having things like that. And so they come in, and then the parents are like, I do it for both parents. So typically I have both parents there, and they're like, oh yeah, by the way, we're divorced. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. Let's talk about it. So it becomes a piece of conversation. It's not always the first thing that comes, because parents are typically coming for other things. But yes, I definitely lean in to, how do we talking about the divorce at the house? What did that look like for your family? What are some of the language we're still using for it? And I will say that a lot of the families aren't using the words reframe and aren't using that. And that's a really new language that I am so thankful I was exposed to by Katie. And so I really bring it in, and I'm going to help share with them of like, okay, great. I'm going to take this opportunity to help educate you guys and help give you more tools to talk about it. So I do think it definitely comes up with my families more in the beginning, but it is typically not like the very first conversation that we have. But I do think it's a really, really important one and very helpful for a lot of families.
And then I would say that, because I do specialize in walking families through the process of divorce, that is one of the first conversations that I have after the intake with parents about, what are your concerns? What are your hopes for your kids? How do you guys walk through conflict together? What are communication styles that each of you have? So one of the first things that they ask usually is, how do we tell our kids? Because it's starting to get to the point where we need to tell them, and we have no idea how to do that. And so this is educational foundation laying, pretty out of the gate. Okay, you're gonna have to like edit out all this like jumble around. But
You got it.
okay, here we go. Let's just try this again. I'm trying to get to, because one of the things was like,
You want me to ask a different question?
Commonly asked questions you get from parents. How do we tell our kids?
Mhm.
Because I can just walk through that whole thing. Here's how you tell your kids.
Okay, then let me do this.
Okay.
I'll just ask the question. Okay. This is great, y'all. Are there just common questions that you're going to get from parents? Like, are there top 10, top 3? I don't know. Some common questions that come through all the time.
Yeah. So I would say probably the most common question that I have for sure, that if I could just give a script to people, for how to talk to their kids about the fact that they're getting a divorce, I feel like it would probably answer 90% of the questions that I get. And so here's how it goes. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. All right. So it goes, you talk to them together, as in both parents should talk to them at the same time. If at all possible, all the children should be present at the same time. The reason for that being that none of the kids feel like they have to hold that information from the others, or that they have to hold that information and carry it by themselves. And then the language is something like, we have been married for a long time. We worked really hard to make it work. We have decided that the best thing for our family is for us to no longer be married and for us to have 2 homes. We will always be your parents. You will have a home with mommy and a home with daddy. We will always be here for you. We will not be married anymore. Couple of reasons for that. What you hear there is a joint responsibility for the decision.
Clearly.
Yeah. And
Very
so
clearly.
that's not, well, your mom has left me. Your dad has decided he can't be here anymore. Right. And so what's really important about all that, is that children need 2 good parents. They feel very much, and like, I can't overstate this, I don't think, and I would like so value your opinion. But children very much feel like they are half of one parent and half of the other parent, quite literally.
Yeah. Like I can't tell me, like, I mean, I have kiddos that come to my office, but they'll be like, I have my mom's eyes, or I laugh just like my dad. Like they have already assigned ways that they are each person. And so I completely agree with Katie. Like they are very much of like, I'm half this, this is just like mama, this is just like dad. And that's important to them.
And so then if we follow that line of thought, if mom says, well, dad doesn't love us enough to stay here, or if that's the undercurrent message, then that is super, super painful. Right. And so if the combined message can be, we have decided that the best thing for our family is, that's a super hard message to say. That's very difficult for both parents to get on board with some of the time. And so that's a lot of the work that we do, is to kind of help them get on the same page with. Does that kind of make sense?
It makes great sense. So here's a question for you. So the parents have already screwed this up. Either they told one kid first, or they said the truth, which is not that. Is there hope? Is there, we can't rewind. What do you suggest in those cases?
Well, I'll say, like, I always think that there's hope. And I'll say most of the time the parents come to me, they've already been like, there's already a very strong narrative one way or the other. Like, just because of this. And so like I go back in and we start from day one of like, okay, here's the thing. And here's what we're seeing because of like the narrative that's written. And that's okay. Like, let's get back on the path that we know that leads to, I would say, like, unity, in my opinion, right? Like, so no matter what, like, this is a family, right? You have 2 homes, but you're like going to always be a family because of these little people that y'all that have. And so like, how do we then get right back on the path, and how do we support you guys in creating a narrative that is consistent for your family, and support you guys in shifting your language that is supporting your kiddos and putting them first in this. So I definitely think there is hope, and that's not, nothing is all lost for sure, but we have to be intentional and be aware of how we're going to make those shifts.
It's that whole reframing thing. Yeah. That's when that language comes into play. You know, Katie, I think that something too, just hopeful about that whole thing is, I think the second step in your script there was that everyone needs to be together. All the kids need to be together. And even like 5, 6, 7 years ago, before FaceTime and Zoom and all the things, like something like that might have been less attainable, but I really feel like with intention, it's possible to get everybody together at the same instant, maybe not in person. So I love that. So that's one, I mean, that's one question. What other questions? Do y'all have any other questions that you can know to expect from parents? Just common questions about divorce.
Well, I'm going to say like, not only the, how do we tell our kids, but like be prepared. I always tell parents of like, you're not just going to tell them once, like just be prepared. Right.
yeah.
So like, it's going to be a
That's good.
continuous thing that you're going to have to talk about, especially with our younger kids. But all of them, right. So like Katie mentioned, like, what is it? What do I say when we're just driving to school and all of a sudden they're like, why do I have to have two houses? Like I left my blah, blah, blah at dad's house. Why do I have to have two houses? Like
Yeah.
being prepared that this is going to be a narrative that is told and retold and retold. Be one, because developmentally, that's what they need. And two, it changed their world, not for bad, but it did. So how do we help support them? And that's a big piece of what I think is also important, is helping parents know the expectations.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. And there are lots of questions like, what do we do with, oh my gosh, like, what about parenting time? So how should we do 50-50? Should we do more time at one person's house? Is that like, is that better for them? Is that worse for them? That's actually super common.
Really? Like the legal question of how should we lay out the paperwork with our lawyers, or more of,
so it's actually more like,
actual?
how should our family function?
Mhm.
Right. And so there's laying out the paperwork with your legal team, and that really comes secondary to what you've decided to do.
Yeah.
So what you've decided to do, like from a day-to-day basis, comes from what you want to do. And then your legal team should follow. Right. So, so really it's like, if I live here and then their dad lives, 20 minutes away, or even their dad lives in the same neighborhood, which would be amazing. Right. Like that's what that's what we would hope for. Then, what should our schedule look like? And so I feel like I get that question a ton. And so, so walking people through that. And I think what I would say about that is that, it really needs to just follow what works for your family.
Sure.
And I think that isn't really like a great cut and dried answer, but so for example, if the kids have a ton of extracurricular activities in the afternoons and one of you tends to work later on certain days of the week, that needs to be considered. If somebody has 3 days a week that they don't work and somebody else works full time, that should be considered.
Yeah.
Be thoughtful about where the kids typically already spend time. And I think, unfortunately, what happens sometimes is people get ideas about how they want child support to fall in some states. And it's not the case in all states, but in some states, depending on how many overnights you have, that dictates how much child support is allocated. And so some people, and it's totally understandable, right, will, budgets are very real. Cash flow is a very real thing. And so sometimes decisions unfortunately get made based on cash flow. And I, again, have a ton of empathy for that. And that's sort of like the tail wagging the dog. Right. And so if we're staying true to what's best for the kiddos, what we tend to recommend in the industry is to start with your schedule and then work out the rest of it. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. So then a follow-up question to that would be, if someone comes to you, they've got their plan in place, they've already filed the paperwork and everybody's signed off, and they come to you, they're seeing you and they're realizing, darn it, we did the plan based on off budget, or whatever the case. Is it easy to go back and amend or adjust those, that plan that they came up with their lawyer, with the child support and all that? Or is that kind of a long process? I'm sure it differs. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it varies by state.
Okay.
And if you've got, you can always agree to do something other than what's in the plan. So if you, so like if you were to go to Meagan, and say, here's what's in our plan, it's not really working for us. We think we want to do something different. And Meagan helps somebody walk through that. And then they just agree to do something different. They can just do that. Right. Nothing really has to be submitted to a court.
Yeah. As long as both parents are agreeing and feeling that that's best intention of the kiddo, that we can do that. And I think that's to the point of like, I think the other misconception I didn't even think of until now, but is that it has to be like, this has to be a first, third, and fifth. Like that's the child break has to be that. And that is definitely not true. And I'd love getting to support parents and kiddos and figuring out what's best for their family, like Katie's saying. And so there are lots of flexibility within the system, as long as parents are willing to be flexible and see their kiddos' needs first.
Oh yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's a good point.
That is really good. And you know what? I'm thinking back on just a friend that I had who would gather her divorced friends on Thursday nights, because she said Thursday night is typically the night when kids go to their dad's houses. And so in my brain, I'm kind of thinking like you just said, Meagan, there's one option, and it's, those three things, and kids always go to their dad's house on Thursday.
Not anymore.
And so that's not the case. And so when you say not anymore, is that like since 1998 or I don't know, like, is that how recent is that?
I mean, it's kind of been a gradual shift, I think.
Okay.
So there's really more of, I don't, to be totally honest with you, I don't really know. I know that there's just this shift that's occurring that is more about creating, like sitting down and writing out what is best for your family, and then writing out legally what matches that, instead of following what the state says, which is either first, third, and fifth weekends of the month, plus Thursday, plus spring break every other year, a week at Christmas every year, and a month at in the summer. Yeah. And so which have all these names, right? There's like in Texas, it's called standard possession orders or standard expanded modified. It's like they all have these titles, which I think, people still do them. Absolutely. And I think there's just a move towards being more creative, really kind of across the country. And so you see these like really wonderful, so some of the things I know, like Taffy, you do such a good job towards the end of the podcast, kind of talking about resources and stuff. Right. One of the things, like if you look at, so Jacinta Gallant has really wonderful resources about creating super creative and fluid parenting plans. Her like whole line is called Our Family in Two Homes. Okay. And then Susan Gutherie has an awesome podcast. And so, and all really kind of, there's just this really wonderful movement in the dispute resolution world about that, right? Like just being really creative and meeting the family where they are, instead of making the family fit into a legal mold that's easy and simple. So
I'll link both of those in the show notes. But as you were explaining that, I'm thinking about, when you go to write a resume or a reference letter, you can generally Google like resume template or something like that. So is that similar to where, you can even go to Etsy and get a resume, purchase a resume template for $3. Is that kind of what that is, like in simpler terms, just like a template that she offers? Or is it more of a process, like a coach through process?
Oh girl, it's a whole process.
Okay.
So there's like workbooks and like a whole thing.
It's not just like drop in your, Okay.
Yeah. So it's like, think about how you might want to, what holiday traditions do you have that you want to preserve with your children? Which ones are important to this spouse? Which ones are important to this spouse? How can we both honor those rather than you get the first week, the end?
Yeah.
Right. And which I think is really quite heartbreaking. And does not feel good to anybody. Like that doesn't feel good to the kids. It doesn't, because neither parent wants to do that. The kids feel kind of jerked back and forth. And, you know, if you can think of how like beautiful it is to have families that are like, well, our tradition is always to have hot chocolate on Christmas Eve, and or for Hanukkah, for us to always be able to do our gifts at specifically 7:00. And then they could go to dad's, and then they could do his set of gifts at 8, you know, and to build that in that way, that is so magical. And so I get chills talking about it. And, but if you just follow what the state says with no consideration for that, I just think we've lost something, you know.
And I'd say everyone loses something in that. Like, so when we're just going with the cookie cutter thing, like dad's losing something, he's losing something special. The kids are losing something special. Mom's losing something special. So I know it takes a lot of work to do these and to be really intentional going through them. But I will say, like, to me, the work that you're doing in the forefront is building such a huge foundation for your kiddos. Like, look at the things that they're learning from, like, mom and dad being able to compromise, being able to be honored for their special, but what they love and their family time being honored in different ways, and so many amazing lessons. Like, I think that I totally know it's work, and Katie and I love working with families and want to support families in this. And there are other professionals that want to support families in this, but we know it's work, and we want to make sure that we're providing that space, because we know the payoff can be amazing for families.
Meagan, as y'all were explaining, just the restructuring and just all of that, like, Katie, you used the word magical, and it felt magical for me to listen to you explaining that, because I really do feel like when parents are dealing with divorce and just all of the logistics of that, they're not thinking about, you know, what holiday is coming up and what traditions that it's, you know, what's going to make them sad, because they didn't think about it beforehand, you know?
Gosh, of course.
And so I'm just so glad that y'all are there for that. And y'all are a resource, and there's other resources too, but that y'all are a resource for that. And I actually wanted to ask, is it often that you've set that foundation, you've done the thing, and then the kids get older and they start doing all of those sports, and that needs to be readjusted or whatever? Like, you do a lot of that as well? Or are there often times where you have to tell people, hey, I think we might need to readjust here? Or do people come to you saying, I feel like we need to readjust, can you help us? Or maybe it's a mixture of the two. As far as
so I'll say, like, what I like to do is I want to give parents the freedom. And I think, like, working in the front end of saying, like, this is yours. We are going to empower you. You have the right. We have to, like, learn how to listen to each other. When dad says, oh man, we have something really special coming with the family, can we do it? And mom being able to, like, that flexibility. So I think in the beginning, one of the important things is, like, it is y'all's plan for your family and empowering them, and really working in that collaborative piece for them. And then at that point, they get to make those decisions, and they get to do that, as long as, again, like we're saying, they're being willing to listen to the other parent and be collaborative in that. So I would say, like, the plan exists to support the family, not the family to support the plan.
Oh, that's key. That is key right there.
So then
say that again, Meagan.
Change. Okay. The plan exists to support the family, not the family to support the plan. So it can shift and change as the kiddos get older or as things happen. That's the goal of it.
Absolutely.
So recognizing, like, as we're going, when we're having the divorce, like, it is so stressful. There's so much going on. We feel like there's deadlines and lawyer bills and all of the things that are happening. And there's this sense of, like, guilt that comes because the family structure is changing and we're worried about our kids and all of those things that we recognize, like, we have a huge decrease in functioning. Like, we are not always making rational decisions. We are not always planning and doing the things that we want to be intentional about, just because there's so much stress and so much going on. And so I think, like, I like to tell parents, like, you can take a breath. Like
Yeah.
it can wait, it can pause. Like, and realistically, most times the divorce, like we know when the court cases, and it's months away. Like there's time. And so recognizing that, giving parents space and time to process what they're feeling, to have bouncing boards, to bounce good ideas out,
Get
to
support.
get support, to grieve, right? There's this huge piece of grieving, whether you
Huge.
want it, you're the one that initiated the divorce, or you're not, or the one that it was initiated to. Either way, you're grieving a loss of time. And so making sure we're giving people the space to do those things so they can be really intentional about making decisions that support their family and moving forward, I think is so important, and is a big piece that is important to me when I work with parents. I talk a lot about, like, parents are like, you're a pitcher. I like very visual person. So I'm like, you're a pitcher mom, you're a pitcher dad, like you're pouring into your kid all day. But if no one is pouring into you, then like there's going to be a problem. There's going to be a point where you cannot pour into them anymore. And so especially when we're having high stress times in our life, like you have to be intentional about being poured into.
Well, and I'm even thinking like just basic self-care. Like, hey mom, hey dad, are you getting some sleep? You know, let's talk about this stuff, but also, are you getting sleep? You know, I love the picture analogy. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, I've got a little segment that I love to do called Ask a Therapist, where I've kind of polled some of our listeners to see what questions they would want for me to ask you. And actually, I have two. And the first one is, my child has little to no reaction to the divorce. Does that mean they're fine?
Oh, yes. That's such a good one. Meagan, what do you think?
That's good. Yeah, I feel like we hear this a lot.
Yeah.
And I would say, like,
I agree.
One, like, recognize, like, as a parent, you have, if you've done it like the way that kind of Katie and I are expecting, like, you've planned this, right? Like, you've come up with a story with your partner, like you've done this, and you've had time to react to respond. We're dropping this bombshell in your child. And you, like, I think giving them space is going to be the biggest thing, right? So, like, one, like, they may just be shocked and like not quite sure. And then two, like, let's give them space to figure out. Not every child who doesn't react is okay. Not every child that has a huge reaction is really, really upset, right? So, like, space and time, and like Katie talked about before, what is the gauge for your child at baseline, and how do we go off that?
And actually there's okay, so I'm going to give you another really good, really excellent book. It's like my Parenting Through Divorce Bible. And I send it to all of my new clients that are coming through the divorce coaching or collaborative divorce process or parenting through divorce. It is called Parenting Apart. It's by Christina McGhee. You can get it on Amazon, and it's super affordable, but one of the things that it talks about is, you know, anticipating your child's response to divorce by age group. And it just talks about the different things that you can anticipate from different groups. But, you know, one of those things to anticipate is like very flat reaction initially, right? And then usually what that means is internalizing. So I'm going to take those feelings and bring them inside for a while and try to figure them out. And then once I know what they are, or I know, or I can manage them, then I will deal with them externally. Okay. So exactly like Meagan said, like that just means they need time and you need to stay available. So usually what we tell parents is we continue to say things like, you know, I just want to make sure if you have any questions, you're absolutely able to talk to me anytime. Okay. How are you doing? Do you have any questions about it? You know, we don't pick at it. We don't dig at it, but just make sure they know, that you're around and available.
It's golden, because it kind of goes back to that tidy little box, or the marker points of, even maybe my kid is 5. And so I'm going to be looking in that 5 age range, but maybe my kid is an older 5. So the reaction might show up in the 7-year-old reactionary box, where I can see then. So if my child is this way, then this. So I think that's good, because I think that just, yeah, that's soothing to know that there's words that are describing the way that your child is either behaving or reacting. So that's really
Yep.
good. That's a good tip.
Mhm.
Also, I will put that in the show notes. Um, the other question, I feel like y'all maybe answered it. I'm gonna ask it anyways, and then if y'all want to add something, great. But I feel like you might have answered this one before. But the other question that I got from our audience is, how do I answer my kids' question of why did you get divorced?
Oh,
I feel
yeah.
like we kind of answered that, or do you have something else to add to that?
Why did you get divorced? Well, I think, do you want to take a stab?
Sure. So I would say like this goes back to the script, right? So I would say being consistent with the other parent and like having that narrative that fits. We want to make sure that it's consistent for it. And then being willing to have, I always tell parents, like, we don't have to have all the answers, right? So if the narrative that you guys created is mommy and daddy love you very much, but we need 2 homes to make sure that we're the best people, then that's great. And
That's
so
the
like
answer.
sharing that, and then that's the answer. And then they may say like, but this is so sad. And like have
It
lots of
is.
other questions. Yeah.
It
you're
is.
right. It is. It's hard for all of us. That's okay. Like we don't always have to have everything doesn't have to be wrapped up in a perfect bow, right?
Exactly.
And creating that space for your kiddo is going to be really important.
Mhm.
And so having that consistent answer that is scripted, and it's okay if it's scripted.
Yep.
And then being willing to hold that space and not
Yep.
know and not share. You don't have to answer
I agree.
every question your kiddo asks. Like there's a
Yep.
parent piece and there's a kid piece. And the best thing to do for our kiddos is allow the parent piece to just be the parent piece.
Oh,
Yeah.
totally agree. I totally
Yeah.
agree.
Mhm.
Yep.
So they don't have to handle those emotions
Nope.
and
Mm-mm.
details. And yeah, so consistency is the key. I mean, I feel like in any parenting thing, whether it's divorce or something else, consistency is always the key. So,
Mhm.
okay, I love that. Y'all did good with the Ask a Therapist. Good job, girls. um, Okay, so then, yeah, just the last part of this time, our time flew so quickly, and I'm sure there's things that we'll remember as we log off and think, "Oh, darn it, I forgot to say that thing." But what tips or additional resources besides the ones that you have already referenced, Katie and Megan? What tips or resources do we want to drop here and mention for our parents?
I would say the big thing that's important to me for parenting is kind of that picture analogy. So like giving yourself as a parent space to process, and a community that can support what you think is important for your family, I think is huge. So that would always be my thing. It's like, this is a big journey. You can't do it alone. Find your people that pour into you.
Yeah, I agree.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
And I think in addition to that, because I completely 1000% agree. I think the only thing I would add to that is that the thing that I would add to that is that the professionals that you choose to hire matter.
Yes.
So I would not rush the process of finding an attorney. I would not rush the process of finding a mediator.
Yeah.
Be thoughtful, ask friends, look at reviews online, interview the people that you're talking to, really spend time around that. That's very, very important because it's going to have a really big impact on your process, and your family. And so that's all that I would say. And I think in every state there are always communities of attorneys and mediators and counselors that are super interested in helping families do this beautifully. And so usually you can find those folks on, there's, collaborative divorce communities are really interested in this. Mediator groups are interested in this. And so I just would do a lot of research about it. And so, yeah, that's what I would add.
ladies, this has been so informative, and I just
So,
want to thank you for your passion that got you to this place, and just thank you for doing this work. It's important work, and it sounds like it's definitely a niche, and something that I can tell that you both is important to y'all. And so thank you for taking it seriously and doing what you do. And thank you for your time today. Thank you for taking the time out.